It's not on yet. It's doing the countdown. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, we got some. All right. Welcome to our Wednesday evening Bible class. We're in the book of Ecclesiastes. We have some outlines in the back over there. If you're joining us live streaming, you're welcome to let us know you're out there. Or also add comments, questions, concerns about the class. I have our comments up to where I can look at them and interact with you. I'm getting better about where I'm picking up on them and seeing them. Maybe a little behind, but. So we're continuing in this. This is lesson 11. We got one more lesson in the book of Ecclesiastes as we wrap this up next week. Tonight, we're going to be looking at what Solomon calls the rat race, which I think we can all kind of relate to when we talk about life. So before we continue, let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. Our most glorious and wonderful Father, we're very humbled as we begin this evening to worship. We pray that you would help us to keep our minds focused upon the scripture and the thought. Hopefully, Father, we'd be able to grow wiser from this study and be able to shape our spirit into the image of your Son and you, Father, that we'd be able to live the life that would reflect you every day of our lives. We'd be able to live a more peaceful life with you and that we can enjoy life the way that Solomon is trying to reveal what our priorities should be while living under the sun. We ask all this in Christ's name, amen. I still have a little bit of congestion, so I will be pausing to get a little bit of water. Okay, so as Solomon's gone through this journey, we saw him go from looking at things under the sun, looking at, in other words, what's on the world, in this physical world that we live in, and how that everything that we pursue leaves us lacking. It leaves us wanting more because we can't be satisfied. If it's a pursuit of pleasure, then we're always going to want more pleasure, more pleasure, more pleasure. Because why? The pleasure wears away. You're going to seek more goals in life, and then you're going to accomplish them. You're going to want more. You're going to want more, and you're going to want more. And he said all these things are vain. We're going to see the years and years go by, the seasons and Christmas and holidays and summer and winter and fall and death and life and birth and all these things that just seem to go on and on and on. And they just seem temporary. And the word he uses is vanity. It's something that is just temporary. It doesn't have the real substance that we want to try to accomplish. We are created in our Father's image. We are created in a way that we should be connected to him. It's not natural spiritually for us to be disconnected from him. And when we have that void and we don't have that connection with him, we're going to seek it out. We're going to fill it one way or another. You're going to do something. It's like a pothole. You're going to get so aggravated, you're going to either throw rocks in it and get it to where your car doesn't hit the bottom, or you're going to do it right. And so that's kind of this quest that I see that as Solomon is looking at life and reflecting back, that he's been trying to find the true meaning of life. And as he's gone through the first part of the book and expressing all these things, one hinge point that kind of turns is then also reminding us that we can take, as we have, like we do with everything else in life, that we chase after, and we're never satisfied with it, that we need to understand, one, God has given you what you have to enjoy. If it's working with your hands and you're doing something, that is a blessing. That is something that you should be able to find joy in. Now, without God, everything under the sun in this physical world, without God, has a whole different meaning. And that's when he says it's vain. Why? Why is it temporary? Why is it lacking satisfaction? Because everything in this physical dimension in which we live in is decaying. Just the way it is. Brand new car, brand new house, brand new clothes, brand new baby. Everything in the physical dimension in which we exist, it is in a constant state of decay and dying. And so if you look at life that way, if that's all you've got, guess what? You're an atheist. And you're not real happy. And so what do? You seek out pleasure. You seek out jobs. You seek out all these other things, but they're going to leave you hollow. And the other main thing he kind of talks about is we all end up where? In the grave. The rich man, grave. Poor man, grave. Wise man, grave. Dumb man, grave. Everything. So that, that kind of shattering, it's kind of like, Okay, maybe you're not going to have a memorial in Washington, D.C. with your name on it, but guess what? Where's that guy? He's in the grave. Where's the cowboy that died traveling across the West, and nobody ever saw him, and his bones are out there? Where's he at? He's in the grave. He doesn't have a memorial, but where are we all in? And if we have that in mind, then it's either going to make you seek something out, either ignore it, block it, reject it, and just please yourself all you can. Or you're going to find absolute satisfaction with God. So this next part, as we transition in, is looking at this idea of what he calls the rat race. And when we talk about the rat race, it's something that we all are kind of familiar with, the fact that we live in this race, and the idea is this imagery of a rat inside a maze, right? And what's he doing? You put the cheese at one end, and he spends all his time doing what? Trying to get to where? Get to the cheese. And so we kind of use that loosely and saying, that's what it feels like, doesn't it? Or the hamster on the squirrel cage, it just keeps going round and round and round. And so when we look at this outline, we're going to look at 5 different things. The rat race, we're going to look at the idea of we won't fear the battle, we won't fear the night. Go check, see if we're still on. I better check. We're going to be looking at the rat race exposed, life in the fast lane, wisdom versus folly in daily life, and then a fool's portrait. And that's going to be a little bit of a composite, these last 2, of looking at some of the other scriptures around that and looking at what does a fool look like. And then the wise man's boundaries with fools. How do we live in a life that is living with fools around us and stuff? So the first thing he starts out with what I call kind of the observations on the rat race. He says, first off, the rat race, it's foolish. And it's something that you get caught up in, and many times you're unaware of it. And so he describes it in Ecclesiastes 9:11. He says, I saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, and the battle is not to the warriors, and neither is bread to the wise, nor wealth to the discerning, or nor favor to the men of ability, for time and chance overtake them all. So everything, in other words, at some point, doesn't matter how strong, how hard you run, there's no guarantee that your efforts will be successful. Now, it's not saying that if you don't plan, if you plan, you're just wasting your time. But a lot of people are really taking their plans to the utmost and just focus on them. But as we look at this, we sometimes believe that the life is by the stronger, those who are strong, and those who are going to be able to overcome. And yet we see that many of them, out of nowhere, they just have a disaster hit them. We see pro athletes that just are on the top of their game 1 minute, and then in 10 minutes later, they have an injury and they're done. It's gone. And so it's not always that. It's that that life has that part about it. So time and chance eventually is going to overtake them.
And with athletes, not everybody to categorize people, but that's all they lived for. And so that's why they've lost their whole entire life. Because that one time, that one chance they fell or had an ACL injury or whatever, and it's like they feel their whole life is over because that's all they lived for.
And that's really a good description, saying, like an athlete that becomes so focused on sports or whatever it is, maybe even a doctor. I've known some doctors that out of nowhere, something's happened to them. I know one doctor, he was a brilliant surgeon, and all of a sudden he ended up with hepatitis C because of an infection from a patient, exposure to him. He could no longer do patient care contact because now, and his whole life was around that. And he had to redirect and get into other clinical aspects of medicine. Dr. Lindley. Dr. Lindley had an accident where his hand was injured, and he was a thoracic surgeon. You know what he did? Went to law school. If you'd have told him 50 years earlier, you're going to end up a lawyer at the end of your life, no way. I'm not going to do that. So we can see how, like it says, time and chance eventually can take over all of it, all of us. What's that?
I think that's true.
Yeah. So the race, in a sense, for those type of, and again, we're talking more of the negative level, because there's nothing wrong with an athlete that has that type of drive, or a person who has a drive for that type of profession. We're talking about the rat race. Because if we talk about it more, we're going to start seeing, like even the next point is trusting in your own abilities. There are some very great people who have been able to remain humble and understand that there's a blessing that they're getting greater than just their own abilities. But Solomon says in verses 9 through 13 about this idea. He says, moreover, a man doesn't know his time. Like fish caught in a treacherous net, birds trapped in a snare, so the sons of men are ensnared at an evil time when it suddenly falls on them. Also, I came to see this as wisdom under the sun, and it impressed me. So, the rat race not only, it's not only the strong survive. He reminds us that trouble can fall on everybody. Some of the most, like some of these survivalists, mountain climbers that I've seen that are just amazing. Mountain climbers fall to their death. There's something about mountain climbing and those free climbers that are just, to me, enthralling, because it's just like, oh my, I get vertigo watching them climb on those, and then there's been some that just, they fall.
And the operative word here is suddenly. It comes on and bam, you're gone.
Yeah, it's suddenly, right? And that's what you cannot predict. Or somebody having a stroke at the age of 35. Not unheard of. It happens. All of these things, again, are not saying, don't trust in your ability, because we need to have self-confidence that you can accomplish things. God said that's a blessing. That's a talent that you've been given. But when you jump into it at the level of a rat race, where that becomes your sole focus, it's very similar to all those other things he already covered, that if you become so focused on that, and that's where you're drawing your pleasure, your satisfaction from, wake up. Wake up, because it can all go away quickly, right? And so he says, and you just think of the number of people during like World War II, the different traumatic things that happen around the world that have been ensnared during an evil time. I think of, even like Einstein, he just comes to my mind. A lot of the scientists were stuck in Germany when Hitler came to power, and they were running for their lives trying to get out of the country and get somewhere else. We see great artists, great scientists, different people, good people, that they had nothing to do with the catastrophic thing that happens to their country. A tsunami hits, things like this, that we can see that these things can suddenly come upon us. It doesn't distinguish, right, between the two. That's one of the things. It's not going to pick out and go, well, we're only going to get the bad people. We see earthquakes kill the just, the unjust. And, that if we're trusting in our own ability, I almost see this kind of links back to this idea of this self-contained ability that I don't need anybody else, that I can do it on my own. And that is developing into what I call the human God syndrome, where we are trying to become self-sufficient. I can do it. I can please myself. I have the authority, the power, the desire. And that's what a God is. And there's only one God.
That's right. Amen.
There's only one. The rest are false gods. But when you do that, then you start to the harm of others. You see, that's where all of these things in the rat race also come down to start harming people that are around you, because of it really becomes very selfish in orientation as well. those people who stay in that type of a level intensity of living are fools. Now, as we go through here, we're going to see that word is used really broadly today when we say it. And the way that Solomon is looking at this is a fool is somebody who is neglecting their relationship with God. Any spiritual relationship, it's somebody who's ungodly, that they're missing the point. If you think about it, if somebody's focus in their drive in life is around this rat race life and pleasing themselves, guess who they don't have time for? God. So why? Because I can do it. Like a little kid. I don't need my dad. I can do this. No, you can't. And so that's why he says, those who remain in it. And it's kind of interesting, this proverb. It may not seem like it to you that it fits, but listen to what he says in 14 and 15. There was a small city with few men in it, and a great king came to it, surrounded it, constructed large siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he delivered the city by his wisdom. Yet no one remembered that poor man. So what is that? So you have somebody of great power, the king, comes up against a city with no ability to really defend itself, no way they could handle this type of resistance. And then you have this man who is a poor man. This is a man who has no status in the city, but he's wise, which already starts to sound, poor people have wisdom? Well, of course. I hope we've established that by now, that it's not about status in life, your social, quality of who you are in society. It's the opposite, And so when he says this, yet no one remembered the poor man. So who wouldn't be remembering him? The people in the city. The very people that they should be so grateful for saving their lives went right back to the rat race and forgot about it. We're going to tag some more into this. We're going to come back. So some of these verses I will be rereading because it has some other points I'm going to be bringing out. But this is one part of it. And it is this very interesting concept where he'll have a moment of fame, right? And then everybody will put him back down to that poor status. And that's it. And there's been a lot of, they call it their 15 minutes of fame. People will do something, and it's really a good thing. I shouldn't have used that term, because that's more derogatory toward people who are trying to grab fame. But somebody who has done something really wonderful, rescued, saved a life, things like that, and they'll flash all over the news media. And then within about a month or two, society doesn't remember the great moral value, the sacrifice that person gave. And it didn't make a difference in their lives. It didn't make them go, wow, I'm going to change my life to where I'm a better person, that I can do things like that. They just ooh and ah over it, and they go right back to, okay, got to go to work, got to get this, got to do that.
And there'll be another person replacing them that did something good also.
Yeah, and somebody else will come along. They'll do something good. So the attitude of getting caught up again in the focus and drive of life as being your sole focus of accomplishing all these things, getting a car, getting a job, getting your clothes, getting food, paying your bills, getting healthy, whatever those things are, become a rat race that we chase down after, and we neglect God. And people that are like that, that's what I said about it. It goes beyond just harm. It hurts others as well. And then you don't stop to take a moment and look at that person of a lower social status who did this wonderful thing for you, and learn from it, right? Learn from it. And so that's what he means by that. The other thing is human activity, the things that we do, doesn't guarantee success. That kind of ties under as well. That when he says the race is not, I saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, and the battle is not to the warriors, neither is bread to the wise, nor wealth to the discerning, nor favor to men of ability, for all time and chance overtake them all. So all the abilities that we have It doesn't guarantee your success. You would think that as somebody would look at this, it would really make you reprioritize and think about, what am I doing and what am I doing it for? The only problem, and I kind of find it where it's kind of like a midlife crisis, where you get into a point in your life where you think you're going towards your goal of where you envision yourself someday, and then all of a sudden you're about halfway through your life and you're exhausted, and you look and you're not satisfied, and you look around and go, what was it all for? Yeah. You accomplished it, and now it's a nightmare. You've got many other things that are coming at you, and you're still battling it. So strength is more impressive, but the moral well is it's less effective than wisdom. That kind of goes back to what he talked about with the city, right? That was besieged by power and a king, and a city with very few people, and yet one poor man, one of a low social status, had the wisdom to overpower the strength of it as well. And so that's what he says there, and that's a part of it. So the part of 16, the first part says, so I said to wisdom is better than strength. When he saw that, and he considered what he saw, how this one person was able to overcome the strength. And we see this. There's lessons where we see many times David and Goliath type of stories in life where we look at things and we go, there's no way that this person can overcome this problem. It's just too much. And they do. And most of the time, so it's more about wisdom than it is just bronze, being able to overpower something as well. So it's cultivated not by doing, but you know what? By listening. By listening, receiving instruction, counsel, and receiving correction. A wise man is one who can listen and be able to take the correction and be able to learn from those corrections. And he grows from it. So the third point, life in the fast lane, he says, is wise counsel is not usually popular. It's rarely obeyed and seldom remembered. That's the one thing that I like about history, and it torments me about history. I love studying history and reading about it. And then I listen to people today, and I'm like, why do you not understand that we've been in worse and we've been in better? If you go back in the American history and you go back to different years in our own history of this country and the world, there's been horrifically worse conditions in this country too. And we survived and we moved on. But oh boy, the sky is falling, the nation's falling, right? Why? Because they don't listen to history. And not only that, but what about the moral values that we should have gained from looking at the way we treated people, in the Civil War? Yeah. What led us up to that point? You see, instead of learning from that, we just repeat it and we just change directions on the exact same mistake. We just call it something else. Don't call it slavery, we'll call it something else. But it's the same type of immorality and treatment towards people or one another. We're repeating it instead of learning from it. And that's what this reminds me of. Wise counsel is not popular. And rarely obeyed and sadly seldom remembered. This is realistic. People often repeat mistakes because they forget the lessons of the past. We all do it in a lot of ways. I can think of like cooking. When you're cooking from scratch, and you're following a recipe, and then you follow it and you skip a step, or you forgot to put this in it, right? And then all of a sudden you go, ugh, and the next time you go, I'm not going to forget that, and maybe you won't, but guess what? You forgot the other thing, or we have that. Some of that is part. But the advice is to keep reviewing, keep reaffirming good instructions so that it keeps sharp in our minds. Like I get sloppy sometimes when I'm doing things, and I go, I remember I needed to measure this twice. And then I get out there and I get busy and I measure it once and cut it and go, oh, come on, you knew better. You knew you should have measured that twice. I left that out the last time I cooked this. There's the menu right there. Why are you not following? Well, I know it. I have it memorized, and so you just go ahead and you think instead of learning that, no, I miss steps, I need to slow down. Instead, nope, next time, just go the same. That's foolishness, isn't it? So to some levels, it's innocent, okay, it's nobody ate that food. Maybe they didn't like it as well as your last one you had. Maybe I had to use a little more caulking to make up for the shortness of the board or something. But on a grander level, it's spiritually devastating in the effects that it has. Again, and you're not the only one. You're not an island in a stream. There are people around you that are highly affected and touched by the actions and lack of actions of what you're doing. You're like that rock thrown in a pond. Every action and things we do ripples out. All the words we say, all the things we do and don't do, those things are touching everyone around us in our society and in our families. And so the last part of 16b says, but wisdom of the poor man is despised, and his words are not heeded. I don't know how many, especially like the generation that came back after World War II. A lot of them grew up during the Depression, during very difficult times. They knew how to do things that engineers didn't know. But if you told them it was trigonometry, they'd go, huh? Well, how do you do that? I just do it. There was an intelligent level, and if they didn't know how, watch them figure it out. The wisdom that they had. They weren't educated. Didn't have a lot of high school or college, education, but to watch them problem solve. And if an engineer was to walk up, he'd probably sit there and try to tell them how to do it right. And that man that had no education sit there and go, I've built this 1,000 times. And could probably build it better and stronger and last longer. I just look at some of the CCC and the works that they did during the Depression. It's still up there, man, in the mountains, the conservative core. What those guys built, the fire trails, the dams. Well, we make better concrete. Make it last like what they did. How did they get that equipment up there? Some of the places I look at where they cut those roads. And I'm like, how did they figure this out? And they did not have half the sweet, heavy equipment that we're using. And so it's interesting that we view people sometimes based on their credentials of education, whether they're wise. Are you going to listen to this man who has a high school diploma, but he's been working in the trade for 50 years? Or are you going to listen to a guy with a master's degree in mechanical engineering? Listen to them both, right? Honestly. Listen to them both. Give them that. That's what a wise man would do, and say, okay, this man's done it. But this man may have some knowledge that would help it be better. Because they did, and I'm not degrading the engineering knowledge, because we've learned a lot about materials and how to build things more efficiently and stuff. So, that's what I mean. You thought I was going to pick one, didn't you? You thought I was going to say, well, I'll pick this guy. Both. In other words, you thought I was going to pick the guy who didn't have the education that had all the experience. And if I was sitting in a class paying for education, I'd say, pick the engineer. Pick them both. Utilize them, right? But that's the thing he says. The person, and I say, I don't like the way it says poor man, because in the language, really, it's looking at a social status more than that. Some of the language that he uses, as we read in the Old Testament, sometimes it sounds like it's disconnected. It doesn't quite come home. So I try to bring that around some way so we can understand it. The other thing in the fast lane, what do we see? We see, human rulers that will always shout down and reject wise counsel. And we see that in all different levels of leadership, where you have a person, a president, a governor, a commander, somebody who is in charge of a corporation, and they have all these people around them advising them, and they just don't listen. Don't listen at all, right? And so that's what verse 19. The words of the wise heard in quietness are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. The rat race is noisy. That's one of the things. Noise and all this stuff just distracts. And rulers without this type of wise counsel that they'll listen to, that's a fool. A fool likes it that way. They're narcissists. Yeah. They're people who, their self-importance again. I'm the smartest man in the room. Just because you're in charge doesn't mean you're the smartest man in the room. Right? That's right. And a wise leader knows that and will admit that. I got the title, but you guys are the experts. Let's put this together, whatever it might be that we're trying to do. And that's one of the things that, this create quietness, that you'll see in some of these that I've witnessed in my lifetime, regardless of the military or whatever industry that I have been a part of, is that those leaders that were quiet, they were methodical, and they listened, and they asked questions of everybody. And then they'd make a decision. And then I've seen those that would come in and tell you how everything's going to be done, regardless of somebody sitting in the room that knows more about a particular aspect of the company or the business or whatever it might be. And so another thing, and he says it in war, but the fifth thing we see is wisdom is better than war. I think it's also applicable when it says wisdom is better than fighting. Okay? Instead of fighting with somebody, wisdom is much better. In 18, he says, wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. We see this happening a lot of times. The conflict that we have in the Middle East right now, how many hundred years have we been trying to get peace? And just look at all the engagements that, without getting political, but I know our history, going back to the Korean War, all the way to the present, where we have tried war or some sort of force and it failed. And then when we look at a conflict and we try to use wisdom, that's why I think this is such a dynamic verse. One terrorist walk down the streets of Palestine right after they've made a truce, right? One sinner does what? Destroys much good. But it's always wiser to choose wisdom, to find those solutions versus it is to try to use, I think, brute force. If you really think, if people would listen to the wisdom, we wouldn't have wars. If you look at most of the conflict around the world is around resources. Resources. Whether it's minerals, wood, lumber, oil, gas, whatever it is. It's not just about territory, it's about resources to build. And when you come to it, and we see this recently in our time with these new rare earth minerals and superconductors, and you see this game going on right now in the world. One of the biggest things on the stage of our lives is rare earth minerals. And the negotiations and who has them, who doesn't, injecting it into the Ukrainian peace deal. It was at one time talked about that we would set up an area over there in Ukraine that we would declare and we would take care of it. You know why? It had rare earth minerals. And then Russia would not come and attack it because guess what? We have companies there getting what? Rare earth minerals. Why do you think Russia wants Ukraine? It's a breadbasket of Africa. It has oil. It has rare earth minerals. Every conflict. But there's a way you could share. And that's the wisdom versus bronze. And so many of the things that we see with wars, of course, that's a pipe dream. Because we're always going to want it my way on my terms, and then I want what I want. And I want more of it when we settle the deal. I want more of that deal than what you're going to get. And that goes back to, again, the world living in the fast lane without God. So don't trade your wisdom for impulse, is one of the other things kind of I see. When we contrast wisdom and folly, we see some advantages and disadvantages as we look at that. And, this is one of the most graphic, you probably remember it in chapter 10 of Ecclesiastes 1. Dead flies make perfume's oil stink. So a little foolishness is weightier than wisdom and honor. Kind of similar to the idea of the great amount of wisdom, but yet one sinner can destroy it. One fly. One fly.
Just like leaven.
What's that?
Just like leaven.
Yeah, a little bit of leaven ruins the whole thing, doesn't it? And so, a single compromise as well can destroy everything. It can that. So, don't excuse as well. There's another part of this when we think about, this idea of corruption, of what can corrupt. And so we can see that the foolishness of one, leaving that oil exposed, and allowing it to have that exposure to it. And, it's a far greater idea to be preventative and put the lid on it so a fly doesn't get on it and it'll ruin everything. In verse 2, he says, a wise man's heart directs him toward the right, but a fool man's heart directs him toward the left. This is where a worldly man, a man who's guiding themselves according to the pleasures of the world under the sun, is somebody who's amoral, that is looking after themselves, and is always going to take them the opposite direction. And a wise man is going to be heading another direction. And they're always going to be kind of an opposite direction in conflict with them. In verse 3, even a fool walks along the road. His sense is lacking, and he demonstrates it to everyone that he is a fool. That's kind of interesting, talking about, we talk about living a life or down the road you take and things like that. This is similar to the idea that even a fool, as he's walking down the road, you can tell. He can't even walk down the road without him standing out, His sense of judgment, in other words, his discernment, self-control, moral clarity. The fool, he misreads situations, he speaks without talking, he chooses poorly the things that he goes about. He can't see the consequences because he doesn't care. That's, again, what I was saying about how every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and everyone around you is going to be touched in some form or another by that action that you have. And a fool, he doesn't see those. He demonstrates to everyone he's a fool. He's foolish in public. And over time, the fool develops a reputation because, one, their patterns repeat. They keep doing the same thing. They keep using careless words. They keep having unreliable behavior. They have needless conflict over things that you don't know. They're just in conflict. They have avoidable mistakes that they could have avoided. They just keep going down that same. And so it starts to demonstrate to people what's going on. So wisdom shows in a daily conduct, but so does folly. So does a fool. And you'll see it. And the fool doesn't see it though, right? The fool thinks life's great. He won't admit it, but everybody else will see it. The wise people will see it. Humility and patience versus popularity and partiality. So humility and patience, I got them grouped like that. In the way that we deal with things around us, and this is a ruler again. If a ruler's temper rises against you, do not abandon your position, because composure allays great offenses. This is where I call it courage, moral courage to be able to speak the truth and stay on the truth. And no matter who has the influence or more power above you, if you're wise, you're going to be able to quietly but strongly stand up. And that is where some of the greatest travesties in history has happened. I keep picking on World War II, but many of the wars that we see started, we see that when Hitler came into power, Germany's economy boomed. The industry was turning it around. They went from a starvation of post-World War I, but then all of a sudden, who was the guy that said to Hitler, yeah, let's go ahead and do the gas chamber thing? What? Why didn't somebody say, whoa? And how many of them, during the Nuremberg trials, say, I just following orders? No. So even if, like he says, a ruler's temper arise against you, don't abandon your position. Now, hopefully you're not a fool that's saying this, that you're a fool. If you're a fool, then this is not you. We're talking about somebody that's wise, humble, that's following after God in a spirit of meekness. If you look at Jesus, did he not demonstrate this? Even though he had rulers?
There's a saying that says if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Yeah, there is another good kind of worldly proverb that if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And there's another one too that we use. The only thing that prevents evil is one good man not standing up, or something similar to that. Is that, in other words, if somebody would just stand up many times, you could shut a lot of evil things down. But like we see many nations in the history, like Germany just won, I'm picking on them, but even Russia, China, Southeast Asia, many of the countries, Cambodia, we go on, where, how many people let one man, because they were afraid of him. I call that a coup. That needs to happen. It's like, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to. This is horrible. So composure. That's another key word in here. In other words, don't act like him. Don't act like that fool that's in power. Use calmness. Use composure as well. We see this as well in Proverbs 15:1, saying a soft answer turns away wrath, right? That's something that I kind of learned in arguments, is that when you get into an argument with somebody, is actually lower your voice. You could say the same words,
That's right.
but lower your voice.
Right.
It will freak them out. I would do that with patients when I was a paramedic, and I'd have somebody that's just so amped up and angry and all this, and I would just start talking softer. I was like, it's working. Because you know what? They can't hear you. One, they're not listening, first off, because they're talking too much. But as you bring, it's like turning the dial down.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And they raise theirs, you go to match them. They raise theirs, you go to match. No, bring it down. And you'll find that it'll come down. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about it as well. A soft answer turns away the wrath. Don't match the heat with heat, right? Don't match it. Verses 5 and 7. There is an evil I've seen under the sun, like an error which goes forth from the ruler. Folly is set in it in many exalted places, while rich men sit in humble places. I have seen slaves riding on horses and princes walking like slaves. On the other hand, these are evil, corrupt rulers that are doing crazy stuff. They're putting people in power that have no right to be there. It's upside down, the natural order. Somebody that should be in positions of power, they don't deserve it, haven't earned it, they're not qualified, and they're disastrous. But they're elevated. Then you see the man, and they're not just saying rich men, it sounds like he's saying, well, the rich need to be in power and the poor. No, what he's talking about is people who are qualified that are not serving. He won't let them, he doesn't utilize them. What does he do? He brings the fool up. And so this is a travesty, an error that comes forward from power. What government have you not seen that happen? Corruption. I mean, my love has been presidential history. And that's one thing that I've looked at and studied a lot. And that is one of the biggest downfalls of presidents is the people they put in power around them. Some of the best moral, great men that were presidents has the worst presidency ever. But they were very good men. But the corruption around them was horrific. Because why? They picked people that were bad people, immoral. And that's why that last sentence there is more of an example of the absurdity of what you see is like a slave riding a horse and the prince walking like slaves. And the message really to us is the fact that, you can't really have that influence. I mean, I'm not in power. I'm not going to take over or something, so I can't stop it. It's going to happen again and again. He's not excusing it, but a wise man also understands that this too will end. Eventually, justice will come around. Maybe not in your lifetime, but things correct themselves. And it does go around. So under the sun, we see, and we will always see, imperfect systems of government. But don't mistake as well position for wisdom. Just because a person is in a position of power doesn't make them wise. Boy, we should be learning that one, right? And I mean anybody. We see it all the time. We see it in law enforcement. We see it in different legal systems. We see it all around us where because a person, a judge even, we say, well, that judge, he's a judge, so he's got to be good. No, it doesn't mean that either. It doesn't mean they're wise at all. And so, keep your integrity, even though when you see the orders upside down. And the way we respond is going to make a difference. Again, stand up for the truth. But again, do it collective. Do it wisely. And that's the problem I think Christians have had in the recent half a century, that we've laid back. We say that we're morals, we stand up for the morals of God and things like this. But nobody as Christians unite enough to stand up and say, no, I'm sorry, homosexuality is wrong. We become, and I hate it, but the silent majority. Well, the silent majority, you're going to get crushed. And I don't think protests help. I don't think violence will help you. That is the wrong approach. But I guarantee you, silence is far more destructive. And just letting it ride, and let it roll over the top of us. And this idea of popularity as well, one of the things that I was going to bring up a little earlier is I thought of Winston Churchill. I brought it up about Chamberlain. Chamberlain, just before World War II, went to Germany, and he flies over there, and they'd already invaded Austria. And so he flies over there as a prime minister of England, and he's going to try to get them not to do that again, negotiate peace. He flies back, and there's a famous picture of him coming off the plane with this sign, peace. And it became a meme, if they had memes in that day, as a joke, because Hitler was giggling all the way to Poland before his plane landed. Churchill comes in, and he is, by historians, not exaggeration, say he saved England. One man, that stood up, and the people, he actually had the highest popularity. 90% of England throughout that war listened to him, followed him. He actually played us and got Roosevelt. I mean, he was amazing leader and just fabulous. Did you know that the very first election after the war, they threw him out? Yeah. Bounced him out. It's just kind of interesting that, the way that not learning that this wise man who helped you then turned right around. The other thing is, there's risk. There's an inevitable risk versus inexcusable stupidity. And this is what I think he says in verse 10, chapter 10, verse 8. Kind of an interesting, you've probably heard some of these, He who digs a pit may fall into it, and a serpent may bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones may be hurt by them, and he who splits logs may be endangered by them. If the axe is dull and he does not sharpen its edge, then he must exert more effort. Wise people take risk. You're gonna take risk. You could sit around and go, well, we can't dig a hole because it's not safe. Well, then the hole never gets dug. There's a reason. He's not just talking about digging holes. But there is some risk to it. But there's also some inexcusable stupidity, where, how are you doing it? What is the safety? And that's what he's talking about. Somebody that, he's describing some the scriptures and language that we wouldn't use, but, somebody carelessly, tearing through a wall, and on the other side, there's a bunch of vipers. You never thought to check to see if that was safe, You just blasted right through it. And so you prepare beforehand. You don't go out with a dull axe, never look at the axe and start chopping and then wonder why it takes so long. That's the last part of that verse is, if an axe is dull, guess what? It's going to cause a lot more work. There's risk, but there's also a part where you have to use some brains about it. Wisdom has an advantage, of giving success. The last part of 10b, of giving success. If a serpent bites before being charmed, there's no profit for the charmer. And that's kind of weird because when we don't raise around people who handle snakes. Maybe. But the idea is this man is somebody who knows how to handle snakes and should know better. And so I know that like in India and different places, they'll have cobras inside baskets and stuff, and they handle them a certain way, and they know exactly how to take the lid off and how they're going to, whatever flute they play or whatever, but they know how to handle it. It'd be like him dropping the basket, throwing the lid off, sticking his hand in it. No. And then you look like a fool, don't you? You're a snake handler? What? No. It's not something. You have to prepare. You have to have that idea there. We take a look at the fool, and the character of a fool. One, his language is one of disbelief. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have committed abominable deeds. There is no one who does good. The fool rejects God because God brings a sense of accountability to them, makes their conscience worry, I might be in trouble. They don't want that. And this idea where he says, there is no one who does good, basically that this is a sinful world, that the predominant way that we live is one of corruption. But the fool is one that lives in that type of love. He loves sin. Why? Because it's about himself. That's why he loves it. He gets pleasure from it. He doesn't call it sin. He called, I have the right to live this way. I have the right to live life to its fullest and enjoy myself. And Proverbs, and I'm kind of tying these from others as well as part with Ecclesiastes. The wisdom of the sensible is to understand his way, but the foolishness of fools is deceit. Fools mock at sin, but among the upright there is goodwill. A fool makes fun of sin, don't they? You're just prudish. You're just...
Makes fun of the people that do good.
What's that?
The fool makes fun of those who do right.
Yeah, goody two-shoes, right? Why?
Because they're ashamed that they were going the wrong way.
It reflects on them, doesn't it? It makes, they're like, make myself feel better. What I do is I take you down.
Yep.
And that's a truism, isn't it? Not just spiritual or religious. You see people like that. There's some reason you do something and they're going to criticize it.
Yep.
They'll do something to kind of bring it down. I think they're narcissists too. They're just about themselves, right? And so they mock it. But a sensible person, somebody that's wise, is going to want to understand where they're living, how they're going that direction, and be able to assess themselves. And that's hard. You know, it takes some humility to be able to look and say, man, I'm really messing up on this. I need to change directions. I need some help. Help me out. You know, how can I fix this? The fool goes, everything's okay. I'll just do it this other way, my way. So you examine the path. Fools deceive themselves. They'll every time. And again, they love sin. He loves sin. The wisdom of the sensible, right? So some of the actions, we'll move through these a little faster because I know we're running out of time. You know, the foolishness of talk, when we look at the way they speak. Words from the mouth of the wise are gracious, while the lips of the fool consuming. The beginning of his talk is folly, and at the end of it is wickedness. Yet the fool multiplies his word. You know, I've always say this. You know, it's better you should have just stopped talking, because the more you talk, the more you get in trouble. You know, you've seen people like that. They get themselves tied up. And they hear themselves, and they're like, well, I got to keep explaining that, and I got to keep justifying that, and I got to keep, and they just keep talking and talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. You know, it's like, and the thing about their words is they're really, they're consuming with conflict, suspicion, you know, it's in consequences of their language. You know, those words they can't pull back. Can't erase them. You said it. They're done. They're out there. They're not really sure of their future either, one of the things. No man knows what's going to happen, and who can tell him what will come after him? You know, nobody can explain it. You know, I mean, we don't have a guarantee of tomorrow. You don't even have the guarantee of the next breath to pull into your lungs tonight, right now.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
We just take it for granted, don't we? I'm going to breathe. I'm going to breathe again. And there's a lot of people who, right now, this very second, just took their last breath. They didn't know they were going to have that.
That's right.
You don't know what's coming tomorrow. The fool thinks he does. You know, they're their own worst enemy. You know, the toil of a fool so wearies him that he doesn't even know how to go to the city. They become exhausted by unproductive toil, clueless about the path forward. But they think they're fine. But they don't see what's going on. It does take hard work, but hard work that is self-evaluating, humble, trying to move forward. And absolutely, I think we'd all agree with this one. You know, they make poor leaders. Fools make poor leaders. And this is kind of a warning. He says, woe to you, O land, whose king is a lad and whose princes feast in the morning. Blessed are you, O land, whose king is of nobility and whose princes eat at the appropriate time for strength and not for drunkenness. In other words, the young foolish ones are partying all day long. You got a prince that has no experience. You know, those are bad environment for those. They're wasteful of money. Through laziness, the rafters sag. Through slackness, the house leaks. Men prepare a meal for enjoyment, and wine makes life merry, and money is answer to everything. Ooh, that almost sounds really modern, doesn't it? So how do we deal with a fool? One, isolate him out of your life. Isolate him in your life. You can't avoid him. I'm not saying that because even a fool needs an opportunity to be saved. Okay? Right? We need to be willing and ready and not just that, well, he's a fool, so I'm not going to, I hear this a lot, and sometimes it's justified. I'm not going to cast pearls before that swine. Be careful with that. You know, and that's what Proverbs 14:7, leave the presence of a fool, or you will not discern words of knowledge. In other words, you'll be just as foolish listening to him. Eventually, his foolishness, you'll be giving amens to it. And those silly ramblings, you'll start to, and then if you're not going to stand up to him, then you're endorsing it. You could sit there all day long, be the wisest man, but you know what? You're a fool with him. Because a wise person would say, nah, that doesn't sound right. There's something about that. Have you ever considered that that might be wrong? And so that's why another thing is isolating. But, we have to be careful as well. Leave the presence. Don't speak in the hearing of a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of your words. Be careful who you talk in front of. Don't be chitty-chatting around anybody, people that you don't know. Because the fool loves this stuff. And it's not going to come out the way that you said it by the time it comes back around.
That's right.
It's going to be all messed up. And I think that, like I said about the idea of being open is that, we need to restore them only if there's evidence of repentance. If somebody is being foolish and broken, and I'm talking in a lot of ways spiritually foolish, but, we have to understand that they're in a condition, and when I talk about, again, I'm relating more of the idea of foolishness as people who are hardened against God, that are foolish in their living, and it's reflected in the way they live. Just to bring them back, we have to be very careful. There has to be some of that evidence there. And that's what he says to them. He says, let them give thanks. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness and for his wonders to the sons of men. Let them also offer sacrifice of thanksgiving and tell of his works with joyful singing. So, we're going to go ahead and we're at the last slide there. The last one I have here is, when restored, I think we should acknowledge it. Acknowledge that they've been restored. Let them give thanks to the Lord, loving kindness. But, there's a part as well. It's like I think of the foolish man in Corinth who had his father's wife, right? Because he's a fool. And whenever he was restored, he repented. And then the church there was told, be joyful with him as well. They're still God's children. All right, that's lesson 11 next week. It's actually going to be Christmas Eve. But we'll still be here. We'll be here. Maybe we'll wrap up. I might do something on Christmas, do something about the history of Christmas. And I've been battering that around and doing some stuff, thinking about why not talk about the history of it, what it is, what it's not, on a Wednesday night class. So I think we'll have a class like that. And then the next week we'll knock out chapter 12. So before we go, let's go and have a word of prayer. Our most glorious Father, we're so thankful for the wisdom that we're able to draw from this, and we're so blessed to be able to have the clarity of thinking. We hope, Father, that we're able to understand it. I hope that I was able to present it in a way that would help us to grow stronger in our wisdom, to be able to avoid living a foolish life. Be with us, Father, as we continue through this week. We hope we'll be able to reflect this in our actions and not just in our thoughts and our words. And we pray for those who are suffering in the world, especially those that are members of your family, the Christian family. Bless them, restore them, and strengthen them. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. So until we see you again, God bless.